It's 50 years since the United Nations mission began in Cyprus, 5 decades during which so much has changed. This is an island now split in two. The Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities have been torn apart, but the UN still plays an important role maintaining peace between the two sides. In March, a special service was held to mark the anniversary of the mission, paying tribute to all the peacekeepers of the past and present.
But we stand here today to remember those who over 50 years have served the cause of peace.
184 members of the mission have lost their lives serving in Cyprus, 62 of them British. But since the very start, the UN's commitment to this country has never wavered. The UN operates from a neutral space in between the two communities called the buffer zone, which stretches right across the island. It's an area scattered with buildings and relics from the past. Nicosia's former airport is boarded up nearby. A Cyprus Airways jet still stands abandoned on the runway, where it's been for the past 40 years, one of the many visual reminders of the island's troubled history. In the early 1960s, Cyprus was a very different place. There was no buffer zone and the two sides weren't separated. Cyprus had just gained independence. The island was full of optimism, but it wasn't going to last for long. By 1963, the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot leaders were struggling to implement their new constitution, and the relationship between the two sides started falling apart. Violence broke out on the streets. After years of battling against a British colonial rule, by now both the Greek and Turkish Cypriots had established their own armed groups, and kidnappings, heavy violence and casualties were widespread. Britain stepped in to try and restore peace, but the fighting continued, and the UN felt compelled to take action. On the 4th of March 1964, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 186, calling for a peacekeeping force on the island. UNFICYP was formed, and on the 13th of March, the mission became operational and the first troops arrived. Canadian personnel were the first on the ground. Their role was to patrol the capital and protect the main road to Kyrenia. But soon it was deemed too dangerous for the two communities to live side by side, and the 1st Division line was drawn across the capital. Many of those soldiers who served during those first few years have been back to visit since and still remember the fighting.
We were right in Nicosia. That was our turf. No sooner, 3 days after we were on the ground, someone set off a 100-pound bomb. There was certainly a fair amount of assassinations, violence, firebombing, and that sort of thing. It was a challenge because what we were trying to do was to continue to stabilize and to keep the opposing parties separated enough so they wouldn't get into this business of literally a few verbal taunts, then a few stones, then a few slingshots, and the next thing you know, bang, 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 they were starting to shoot at one another. So we were trying to get them to back off and to calm down and to not necessarily constantly be threatening one another.
I was based on the Green Line. I was with the reconnaissance platoon, and the first 3 months it seems that there was a possibility that there would be long-lasting peace. Then the coup arrived and it changed overnight. The shooting started immediately. There was people being killed left and right.
Fighting did ease off at times, but the military stance never wound down. And then one summer's day, 10 years into the mission, everything changed. On the 15th of July 1974, the National Guard unexpectedly staged a coup d'etat against the Cyprus government, aimed at making it part of Greece. 5 days later, the Turkish government retaliated, launching a full-scale military operation, sending paratroopers into the north.
About 4 minutes past 6, and the first of the Turkish troops have landed in Cyprus. The very first paratroopers are now hitting Cyprus soil. Over there, Alan.
The fighting that followed forced families from their homes. thousands became refugees overnight, having to leave their villages behind. The country was torn apart. On the 16th of August 1974, a ceasefire was called and the UN went out to record the location of the military lines. The Turkish Cypriot forces were in that tree line behind me at the time, and the Greek Cypriot forces were a few hundred metres away in the terminal building. They marked the ceasefire positions, representing the buffer zone that we know today. The buffer zone extends from Katoupyrgos on the northwest to the east coast at Dorinia, covering 3% of the island. Today, Sector 1 is to the west, a high mountainous section dropping down to the coast that's controlled by the Argentinian peacekeepers. Sector 2 runs through the capital Nicosia, coming under British command. And Sector 4 in the east is looked after by a Slovakian, Hungarian, Croatian and Serbian contingent. British units have been based at Wolsey Barracks in Nicosia for years, using the Ledra Palace Hotel, which was once the only five-star hotel in Cyprus, as their base. After years of use and decay, a major renovation project began in 2008, and refurbishment to keep the building habitable is always ongoing. It's now home to up to 100 soldiers who patrol the buffer zone every day. In the past, observation posts were used to monitor the two sides, but today patrols take place on foot or by bike and car. There are still regular disputes with farmers, migrants, developers and even the local military who flout the rules. It's a constant task. Many soldiers have patrolled these parts of the capital to keep peace. From Tutu Regiment Royal Artillery in 1999 to the Royal Horse Artillery in 2005, 40 Signals Group and 7 RLC in 2010, 3 Royal Anglian in 2011 and most recently 2/8 Engineer Regiment in April.
It takes a while. The first month is always, you're very military, you're trying to get in there and sort everything out, and then you realise after a month that Cyprus has been going on 40 years and it takes a long time to sort things out, so we have to find ways to make progress inch by inch. Things have changed and there is progress going on, and I think the people of both the north and south want to make some progress. The 40th anniversary will be a big time and there is hope of a political settlement, and we've just got to keep stability in the buffer zone to enable the politicians to make that progress.
The buffer zone stretches 180 kilometres across the island, and in some parts it's 7 kilometres wide. But here in Sector 2, in the old city streets of Nicosia, it's much closer together. The two sides are just a few metres apart. Fighting here was extremely close, and today the buildings are crumbling, scarred by the violence. But today that's as close to any kinetic activity as these soldiers will get. The dispute between the two sides is now one of words, and it's a complex and sensitive role.
We go out on the buffer zone, we patrol, speaking to the Turkish forces, the Greek forces. I speak a bit of Turkish myself. I used to live there, so it's sort of, when it comes up to talking to them, sort of zap a duke off you go kind of thing.
It's quite urban, it's quite close together. Like the closest part's like 1.5 meters, 2 meters, I think. So it is quite close, especially when you're driving through.
Three days of patrolling, and then you go on sort of different rotations through the week. And yeah, it's literally been throughout the whole 6 months, so it's like 24 hours a day.
Past barbed wire fences and the old high street shops, this is part of the city where time stands still. Brand new cars stored in this car park lie preserved with barely any miles on the clock. A coffee shop lies set up for the day's business. This is a unique and sometimes eerie place to patrol. Efforts are being made to preserve the heritage and to keep this area safe. Conservation work is regularly carried out and the buildings are propped up to stop the facades falling down in the winter storms. The work carried out by the UN has received a Cultural Heritage Award from the European Union. These were once people's homes and livelihoods, and everything is being done to protect the past. Over the years, personnel have been studying the buildings, mapping their use and documenting their contents.
Yeah, these are all in the clothes shops. As you can see, the style on the hats, 1920s, 1930s. And the kids' clothes are or T-shirts.
A few years ago, we took a full tour of the site. This building was once a business centre. The conflict has taken its toll inside and out, but it's still possible to see its use.
So there's quite a few shops, tailors, camera shop, an old chemist. My first reaction was I thought my head was going to explode due to the fact that you're trying to gather all the information in, your surroundings, exactly what you were looking at and how it hasn't been touched potentially for so many years, and the quality of things. Photographs, old posters, they're still in pristine condition, and it was quite, breathtaking, to be quite honest.
A tour in Cyprus on Operation Tosca is unlike any other, but it's one that many are proud to have completed. Every 6 months, medals parades are held to mark the end of tour, giving everyone a chance to reflect on the mission.
It's been busy. It's so different to what anyone expects. As a peacekeeping op, we've kept the peace, and it's very odd to understand that our job is where things don't happen is a success, and keeping things from escalating up, and we've achieved that, so it's fantastic. There's guys who've taken the most of every opportunity, be it just being really good at their job, work to improve the living conditions of everyone else and for future units. Those who've worked outside the unit or done events that have just made it that special tour that it needs to be.
Taking their medals and memories with them, this is a tour few will forget. But they're not the only British soldiers serving in the buffer zone. There are many more playing an important part in the peacekeeping process.